Welcome to the Elevating Funeral Service podcast. If you want to run a successful funeral home, cemetery, or pet cremation service, you don't have to be the one that has the lowest price. You do need to be the one that offers the most value, provides the best customer experience, and clearly communicates that in your marketing. On this weekly podcast, Ellery and Welton will show easy ways to demonstrate value to families and create differentiation that helps you stand out from the competition. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Elevating Funeral Service podcast. I'm your host, Ellery Bowker. I'm with my good friend and co-host, Welton Hong. And today we're lucky enough to have Nicole Weideman with us. She's with a company called Dead Ringers, and I'll let her kind of tell you what she does, but this is going to be a fascinating episode. What we're going to be talking about today is how to properly answer the phone. Welton's company does a great job of helping funeral homes get their phones to ring, and you have to be able to take advantage of when that phone rings to make the most of it. So that's what Nicole and her company does. So we're going to let her tell you all about it. So to kind of set the stage, we have, as funeral home owners and professionals, that phone rings, we answer that phone. I typically am of the belief that people probably don't call a funeral home just for kicks and giggles, right? Somebody has probably died, they're about to die, or they're wanting to talk about their own prearrangements. I've called funeral homes before, and I've thought to myself, I didn't even hear them say the name of the funeral home, or they didn't say their name, or some of these things that I maybe thought about that in passing didn't mean much to me, but Nicole is going to explain to us why those things are super important. But before we do that, I want to talk about kind of why this is important. Obviously, we want to be able to get the calls when a family calls. We want to be able to serve that family. But there's a financial aspect of this because getting the phone to ring is not free. So, Welton, why don't you share with us a little bit about kind of what you see as far as for getting the phone to ring, the cost of that, and kind of what's at stake here?
Yeah, to me, that is probably the lowest hanging fruit. So if you look at the acquisition channel wise, there really are three things that are more or less free from my point of view. First, the website. The better the website, right? If you really focus on conversion of the website, making sure the phone number is on the top right-hand corner, on mobile devices is locked at the top, so people can really find your phone number. Faces being trust, all those things that we talked about in other episodes. Website to me is always low hanging fruit. The purpose of the website is to get them to call you. So that's a first low hanging fruit. Second low hanging fruit are going to be reviews. We all check out reviews all the time. No matter what we're buying, we're looking for plumbers, HVAC. We always check out the reviews before we call them. So those two things are typically what funeral directors are starting to get pretty good at. But to me, working like reverse funnel, looking right from the bottom of the funnel and up, really is a phone call. That really is what really matters at the end. We're good at sending phone calls, but I know most of the time the owners know how to answer the phone. But the staff who is answering the phone might not be right. They're probably not trained or just don't know how to answer the phone, or the owners just trust that their team without training, they know how to answer the phone. So to me, that really is the lowest hanging fruit. If I'm running a firm right now, I will focus on phone conversions first because their phone's ringing, right? From just by being there for 30, 40, 50 years, families recurring, right? Naturally, their phone's ringing already. That will be, right, the first thing I would focus on, not acquisition, not spending more money on Google ads, social media. I would focus on phone conversion first.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I think about in our own company, I think about how much money we spend. Like we have a pretty high acquisition cost. And I think about all the money we spend on marketing and getting our name out there and all this other stuff. And then when somebody calls, that to us is like, okay, now it's showtime, right? Now we have their attention. And, for us to spend a bunch of money to get that phone to ring and then kind of just not even try. Yeah. I've got a friend of mine who's a professional, I don't know if headhunter is still the right term, or what do they call them, recruiter? Anyway, I remember her telling me that, these candidates would put together the best resume, put forth all of the effort, and then they get to the interview and they just fall apart. You know, and I kind
That's
of
the
think
most
about,
important part.
right. And I kind of think about this, like you put all that effort into getting your phone to ring, but then, you know, you just don't do it from right there. So you're exactly right. Well, and I think you have to kind
Oh
of
yeah.
work
Oh yeah,
backwards
definitely. That's a good analogy. Yeah.
on that. Yeah. So,
Mhm.
Nicole, let me throw it over to you. Tell us, well, who you are, a little background, and then maybe a little bit about the company, and then how and why you started the company. So what
Okay.
problem were you trying to solve by starting this company?
Well, I'm Nicole Weideman, and we talked a little bit about this. A whole podcast I could do later would be on names and the importance of names. But I got started in the death care profession in 1990. I worked for a company out of Batesville. You've probably heard of them. Hillenbrand Industries, Forethought, and Batesville Casket. So I was working with Forethought, and I worked with them for 26 years, and I had really great opportunities to focus on marketing within our company, but I was also embedded with clients. So I worked with firms all over the country and got to observe not only pre-need situations, but also at-need situations. And after a while, I was ready to possibly try something new. And I lasted about 6 weeks, and it was time for me to come back to the profession. We know how it gets in our hearts. And I met a guy, his name's Paul Master. He's this people kind of know him. I don't know. No. But he's a well-respected within the industry. And he said, you know, I think we really need to help our folks in our profession focus on phone skills and specifically the pricing discussion. I'm like, okay. And I know a lot of us have been to conferences. I've coached people on this in past lives, and especially the cremation question, how we get that pricing discussion to happen. So with that being said, Dead Ringers got started, and we are now a little over 4 years old. And we've been placing calls into funeral homes asking key questions. Can you tell me about the cremation? What kind of services do you offer? My dad's in hospice. What do we need to do? And pricing is not even the issue. It's basic customer service and how folks answer the phone, showing empathy, asking for names. So the pricing discussion is the least of our worries based on my observations. So at
Very
this point,
interesting.
we're at probably 3,500 calls in of all the calls that we've made. And we're very data focused. So we're not just being subjective about this, but we have a platform that we work from. And we're really trying to focus on key areas that funeral homes, cemeteries, pet loss, crematories can focus on. And all of our numbers point to customer service and showing those types of things. So that being said, I've made it my mission and that we really need to take a step back. Even those of us who think we do a great job, we need to understand what's happening when we're not looking, especially from a management perspective. And if there's a phone on someone's desk, people need to know how to use it, not just whether you have an office manager answering it. You have, I've heard them called host and hostesses. I love that term, but if you're going to use it, make sure that they're living up to that term. And then what happens once a funeral director or an advanced planning person gets on the phone, what's happening in that discussion? So with that being said, I've now been traveling across the country, sharing the data, which I think is most important, and then also sharing what we're calling cringeworthy calls. They're actually happening out there. And we've, I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but we're not finding really good results. We're not finding people that are really connecting with families. So I really am very happy and pleased and humbled to be here today to share the story. So that's a long-winded approach to kind of what we're doing. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that too, because, one of the key strengths that all funeral homes say that they stand on is how much they care. So what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say, is that that's not coming across in the phone conversation.
No.
Got it.
Interesting.
Got it.
We have statistics behind key questions or statements that are made. And only about 6% of the time do death care professionals even acknowledge a loss is about to occur or a loss is occurring. So if I say my dad's in hospice, we're at that point now where we need to make plans, the professionals just run right into almost like reading the vital stats. They don't, I'm sorry that this is happening. I'm sorry that you're having to make this call. Just simple things like that. And taking a second just to stop and say, okay, I need to recognize that someone's calling me on the worst day of their lives. And that's just not happening.
Do you think that's just fatigue, or is it just, it's probably not a lack of sincerity, right? I mean, I think they're all empathetic. They're just not showing it because
Yeah.
they're in that chamber and they're doing that same thing day in, day out, day in, day out. They become a little bit disconnected.
Yeah, I think, especially for very busy locations, calls come in all day long.
Right.
And sometimes they're not even necessarily a first call. Someone asks about service time. Someone asks about what are your street directions. That's kind of getting back to what Welton said. If your website's robust enough, those kinds of things are taken care of.
Right.
But you still have folks that want to connect with you. So it's not just those calls that loss is occurring, but it's the other little things that we may consider annoyances throughout the day. And I can't imagine personally having to deal with folks in that position making that call, and what it's like even to be on the other end of the phone. But I think fatigue does set in. It becomes rote. I hate to use that word, but the repeated calls over and over again. And I think it's really apparent sometimes when someone's almost annoyed by calls. When we have recordings of folks that are like, okay, here we go again. And people can see your face even though they don't see it. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So when you place a call somewhere, you can tell what someone's mood is really by the sound of their voice. Right. And I'm not saying that within our profession we need to be all sing-song, absolutely not. But we don't need to be macabre and sound too over sympathetic. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's really important that we're level, but we are human, that we're genuine in what we do, that we don't sound scripted.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So it's an interesting point because I know exactly what you're talking about. I used to be in the funeral website business, and one of the things I used to tell our customers or our potential customers was that your website doesn't have an attitude, right? Yep. Your website can be the very best salesperson you've ever had. It doesn't have a game to go to on Friday nights. I mean, it can 24 hours a day deliver the right message all the time. So, and I get what you're saying about people huffing and puffing, and they wear their attitude on their sleeve, and it comes across to the phone. I guess my question to you would be, and how they get around this would be interesting to find out. But obviously funeral homes, a lot of them are smaller, right? Staff is wearing a lot of different hats. Typically you could probably say that the skill set of a person answering the transactional calls about when the service is, what the visitation hours are, versus more of the counselor or the ministerial person answering the phone for those that are taking a death call. That's probably the same person in the funeral home.
Yep.
So how do you get around that when there's two very different skill sets there, right? And then two, maybe you could talk about what is the ideal type of person to answer the phone, because I think the person answering the phone in the funeral home often could be the one not doing anything else at that moment.
Yeah, especially with the limited staff, it's okay to have a non-licensed person. I know we kind of get caught up in that, answer the phone, but I think setting expectations. And it may be that you have a part-time person that comes in when you have to go on a graveside service or something like that. And here are the things, Susie, that I want you to cover every time someone answers the phone. Be sure to ask for a name and get a name. What exactly it is that we can help them with. If a loss is occurring or has occurred, acknowledge that loss and then set an expectation for when you will be back with them. Those things right there kind of put folks at ease. And one thing, once you get that information as the owner or the manager of that firm, you're not going in blind. So, Nikki will call you back later. She's at a graveside service right now. Can I get your phone number? It's simple things like that, that setting up those expectations. Don't ever ask someone to call back in. Because you know what they'll do? They'll call your competitor. I don't care if it's a small firm or not. That's just courtesy to say that we are going to we are the leader. We are the professionals. We're going to take the lead with this. So I think that's important, is just having those expectations. People become afraid of the phone. People do not like to get on the phone, especially if there could be someone that's angry on the other end. And I think we always have a defensive stance with this. As we all know, anger is a part of the grieving process. So I'm sure all of us have experienced that within the profession. So having expectations, these are the 4 things I want you to do when someone calls in while I'm away. That's simple. And maybe even having a log, here's the name of the person, the name of the deceased, or the plans that we'll be making, a phone number to reach them, and then set a time frame. He'll be back with you within an hour, 30 minutes. You know, I think with a smaller business, that's fine. With a larger business, we shouldn't even be training to this, is my opinion, but we are. So it's those basic things that you need to think of first. The kind of person to answer the phone, I think if they're well trained, it could be just about anyone. But I think folks that have a customer service background are really good at this. They know the tone of voice to use, answering, not afraid to ask questions of someone. People that are organized, I think are good too. I think sometimes we assume that our apprentices, for those of us in the funeral business, let's put them on the phone. You know, that's the scary, I mean, it happens. And people need to be trained to do that. So I think if you have an office manager, having someone that has that customer service feel to them, a nice tone of voice, I think is really important. Yeah.
But how much does the sales aspect play into it? So for our company, for example, you know, we've got support staff that answers the calls and handles the customers. And, you know, we pride ourselves in how quickly we respond and how well we treat them. But there's only a few people around here that take sales calls, right? So if somebody is remotely interested in what we're doing, we're going to put the best person on that phone to make sure that we have the best chance of moving that thing to the next step. So when I ask, and I might ask one little kind of maybe halfway controversial question, but when I ask about the person answering the phone, you know, do you look for somebody do you put the person on who's got the best closing ability? And I know this sounds transactional, but at the end of the day, the funeral home needs to get the call, right? They need to win these calls. So, and I know in death care, we talk about, you know, sales and all that, like it's some kind of taboo subject, but, you know, revenues derived from sales, right? We need the sales. So you take empathy plus the sales ability, and then you probably have your best chance of winning that call. So do you put the person on the phone that has the best chance of doing that?
If you have a licensed person, yes, absolutely. If you're able to have that luxury of having them answer. But the first thing is, if someone asks about pricing, there's this little thing called the FTC rule.
Sure.
So I don't want to say anything out there that's going to endanger folks based around the FTC requirement.
Right.
I think, and we've all heard, and I'm sure you maybe even have had podcasts about this, being able to talk about your value. If you have a good value offering, that sells itself sometimes, and being able to articulate that, connecting with families in that matter, instead of, you use the word transactional, and that kind of makes me have the creepies, you know, but being able to connect with families on a personal level, instead of just, you know, we have one call, it's crazy. We ask the question, do you have urns? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
Silence. So it's a matter of not just phone training, but can everyone on your staff talk about the products and the value that you bring to the families that you serve? And that's what you have to really, you know, and that may change over time, you know, but I think having huddles, I don't know about you guys, but each morning, let's, you know, what is it about us that makes us different? Or just 5 minutes every day to remind folks that this is who we are. And I think it makes it helpful in those phone conversations. And a little anecdotal thing here. Someone said, well, you're going to go out of business at this dead ringers because phones are going to be irrelevant. Well, you know, I'll probably be long gone by then, you know, I don't know. But at some point, technology may take over, but this is the kind of transaction, you know, I know that there are some folks there, especially with cremation societies, where it is all online, but you still have to be adept at using the phone. So we are salesmen. I don't think it's a controversial question. What you're doing is helping someone buy something, even though it's something that they don't want to buy. So being pushy, we're not car salesmen by any means. And even car salesmen, I think, are getting better at what they do. But yeah. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that's kind of a way that I would frame it.
Yeah, it does. And I think what you said was really valuable, was that, you know, training the staff on how to articulate your value. Right. I think, well, I'll say it this way. I think about a lot of funeral homes operate much like a fire station, right? They're on call, they're trained, they're ready and waiting, right? When the bell rings, they slide down the pole and they go to work, you know? And what they're doing is they're servicing a lot of inbound people saying, I need your help. And what I don't think a lot of them do is recognize that unless somebody calls up and says, I want to use you, that they don't realize that that's an opportunity, right? So those that say, I want to use you, and define that by saying, come get mom, right? Versus those, people that are just inquiring, those just haven't decided. So we'll wait until they do decide, instead of saying those are inquiring, let's really dive down this and make sure that we give ourselves the best opportunity. So and the reason I brought up the whole skill set thing was in North Carolina, for example, on pre-need, you have to be a licensed funeral director.
Right. And that's in a lot of states.
Yeah. And so you've got the funeral director side, which is, I'll call it the minister, right? The ministerial side. And then you've got the sales side. These are two very different skill sets. And to find somebody that does both is extremely rare. And so some of the best pre-need salespeople in North Carolina are those that have both of those skill sets. And some of the weakest ones, if you will, just don't. The funeral directors don't like to sell. The salespeople don't have the compassion or the empathy sometimes that the funeral director has. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there that I think prohibits the growth of that funeral home's pre-need department because of that. So I often wonder how that works on the phone. But anyway, let's dive into this. So if I'm a funeral home owner, right, and you're calling my funeral home mystery shopping, I think, is that the term you guys use?
We call it call evaluation because it's, I think that's a term we've heard a lot, but we truly evaluate a call after it's made. We just don't listen to it and say, here it is.
Right.
But we give, feedback on how you might improve the call. So,
so
call evaluators. Yeah.
There you go. Okay. So you're covertly calling a funeral home, acting like somebody has died, or you're trying to get some information. You're recording that call. What are you looking for? So what's the first thing you would tell a funeral home if you had to pick the top 3 things that funeral home needs to be doing, or maybe is doing wrong, right? We could start with that there. What are some of the mistakes you see, the most common mistakes you see, and then how do you fix that?
One is there's no name. A name is never asked for, or a name is often not given from the business perspective. So when I call into the business,
answering the phone.
Yeah. So they may say Weideman Funeral Home, and that's it.
Okay.
And then they get into a conversation with the person. They don't ask that person's name.
Oh.
So they're missing opportunities to connect with folks. And I know lead generation is really important, as Welton would say, but also using someone's name really creates that connection. It shows that you care. Now, you may have families that no, I don't want to give you my name. I'm just calling around, and that's fine. Let's not dig for the name, but asking a person's name is so important. So I think first off, personalizing the call by simply asking for the name and providing your name. So that's someplace I think that we could really improve. Secondly, as I mentioned before, is acknowledging that a loss is occurring or that a loss has occurred. And
give us an example. So let's say that you answered that phone. How would you answer the phone if it was Weideman Funeral Home, and how would you acknowledge that death? So I call you and I say, hey, my mom has passed away. I'm effectively saying, I don't even know where to start, but
right.
My mom has passed away. Can you help us? Or
yeah, right. I am so sorry to hear about this loss, and that's what we're here to help you through. What is your name?
Ellery.
Yeah, Ellery. What's your mother's name?
Rebecca.
Okay. Ellery, I am glad you called us today, and we're here to help you through the next steps of this. Again, I want to acknowledge the loss here and know that we have professionals on staff that will help you through the process. Okay, so that's really simple. Simply
awesome.
like that. Yeah. And even going back to the very beginning, I have what I call 3 things that funeral homes and other businesses should consider. And it's not just our profession. It's if you ever have to make a phone call to the cable company, it's I want to, if they have a text option, that's what I'm using.
Yeah,
but anyway, stating the name of your business, stating your name, and then a buffer statement. So, whether it might be, thanks for calling Weideman Funeral Home. This is Nikki Weideman. How can I help you today? Or, whatever you're comfortable with. And I think what I found is I need an exact thing to say. No, you have to make it your own. Because if it's not your own, you don't embrace it, and it's already kind of a contentious situation. So I think in my past life, I had books of scripts this thick. You guys have, on how to answer a phone call. But if you're genuine, it helps you be relaxed. I think we sometimes take the human element out of what we do. So there's really 3 things: the name of your business, your name, and a buffer statement. Or it could be, thank you for calling. That's the buffer statement. Weideman Funeral Home. This is Nicole Weideman. So I hope that's a little bit helpful. But simply stating the business name has been a struggle.
Yeah.
because we call and we just get funeral home, or we
Yeah.
get cemetery, or we get hello. I have recordings of where people don't even state the name of the business. So, and
if it ends there, they're throwing it all back, right? The onus then goes to that caller to move that conversation along.
And so, our callers, we don't overarm them, I guess you could say. We want them to be objective, and that they're not leading in the call. It's the professional's job to lead the call and ask the right questions. So that's what we really need within the profession, is to be comfortable in asking those open-ended questions.
Mm-hmm.
What's your mom's name? And then you personalize it by asking, that person's name. And then you go then into the next steps of the process. And I think sometimes we have folks that want to make the arrangements on the phone. I think our goal, current times, it's a little sketchy with what we're going through here in the world, but having someone in your facility, especially if you have a nice facility, is a goal, along with getting that phone call, getting the folks face to face with you so you can make the arrangements versus, trying to do everything on the phone.
Welton and I talked about that on an episode a couple weeks ago. We talked about kind of that if you look at the continuum of a funeral call, right, from the moment they hear your name to the moment they're in your arrangement room signing the contract. I mean, there's a lot of steps that have to happen, and in any sales funnel, your goal is to get them to that next step. Well, no one's going to pull out a credit card and buy this funeral over the phone just because you made a connection with them, right? You need to get them into that building. Well, let me throw this back at you then. So, and I told you this kind of in the conversation we had last week. I was in a funeral home with the owner, and it was just myself and this gentleman. And the phone rang. He excused himself to answer the phone. He said exactly what you said. He said funeral home. He forgot the name of his funeral home. He said funeral home. And there was silence for a few seconds. And then he spit out a price. He said $14.95 or whatever, plus the cost of a death certificate. And there was a few more seconds of silence, and he hung up. And all I could think to myself was two things. One is that I could automate that, because if someone all I want to do is price, we can just press one for that. And two, I thought this guy probably should, lose his right to complain about losing calls ever, because this wasn't somebody doing a report on cremation, right? Somebody was calling because there is an event that has happened or is about to happen in their life, and they want to know about it. But then the third thing I thought about was, we often say that people call and they say, how much is a cremation, because they don't know what else to ask. Like that's the starting point. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
So if I flip it around to this guy, I think he probably answered that way because he doesn't know any other way to answer it. Just like the person that's saying how much a cremation doesn't know what else to ask. He didn't know what else to say. So what do you say to that guy? If you make that call, that's my employee, right? And you say, Ellery, you need to listen to what Welton just said to this family, right? How do we fix Welton? What do you train, or how do you train, or maybe that's not the right word, but how do you, what questions should that person ask? Like, what are some easy low-hanging fruit that a maybe timid, phone answerer, might be able to ask to kind of keep that thing moving forward?
Yeah.
Is that a fair question?
At first, going back to your client there, he should have said the name of the funeral home, his name, all of that stuff, obviously. But I think what's kind of missing there is to me, it sounds like he's lazy, and I don't mean to be mean. Maybe I do mean to be mean.
Yeah.
It's like, here I have another cremation caller, or I have another caller about price. I'm going to get them off the phone.
Right.
Shame on him. And there's this great question that we've stolen, research and duplicate, R&D, that have you ever had to make cremation or any kind of arrangements before? Because then you have an idea of where they are.
Oh,
and so, and that's just a basic question. And if they say, well, yes, I've done this before, and well, okay, then you may be aware of some of the steps are involved. And if it's been a while, some things have changed in how we provide services to families. Let me tell you a little bit of what we provide. And what I like to tell our clients to do is get away from your vital stats. We'll need a DD 214. This is not the time to talk about a DD 214. Well, obits cost this much. They're explaining away costs that aren't even a part of the discussion yet. So I don't know where that mentality comes in. Recognize the person that's calling you. Have that empathy with that person, because these are terms and items that aren't relevant to the phone discussion. So
do you think that's because we're in our own little element?
You think?
I think about the fact that we just become so disconnected. Like, I've often thought that the word direct cremation is our word. I don't think families use the word direct cremation.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And if a family did say that, I think it was one of my friends at Options by Batesville's like, yeah, we offer direct cremation directly after the service.
right,
You
right.
know, so yeah, so we get caught up in our own ideals of who consumers are. And I know that we've all seen the research. We've seen it for years that cremation isn't necessarily about price. That in general, things aren't about price. What I may say is I just want a simple service.
Right.
It's not necessarily, it may be that I don't want an elaborate, visitation, but I do want a nice bronze casket.
Yeah.
I mean, it's those
Yeah.
kinds of things where we just assume what I think is simple and what someone else thinks is simple are two different things.
Yeah, definitely.
And what I find is when we don't make those connections, if someone is shopping, they end up taking the celebration into their own hands and creating, that experience afterwards. And unfortunately, my best friend's father died a couple of weeks ago, and he was cremated. And there was a very simple graveside service offered by the funeral home, and he was a very active member of the Legion. But then the funeral home then was no longer involved once the graveside was done. The celebration of life was planned by someone completely different. If they had done their job up front, they would have had an opportunity to make a real impact to the family and gain some revenue there. So I think that's kind of where making that connection is so important. And the term soft skills, I think they're so important. I wish they would teach them in all business schools and everywhere that we go. I think those really make a difference. And so, yeah.
Right. Nikki, can I ask you a question here? Since you guys do quite a bit of calls, is there a correlation? I'm thinking here is, does the direct cremation business, are they better at answering phones versus a traditional firm where their staff, they're not sold on cremation yet? So that way, whenever people call in asking about cremation, they're like, oh, it's cremation again. Let's just get this person out of the way as fast as possible. Are there any data here correlation-wise where
that's my next project. Thanks, Bolton.
No,
To look into those things. Yeah. But what we find, we have several clients that are like a Neptune Society or a cremation association, and they are very transactional, and the consumers, I think, are expecting that. Maybe that's even my assumption. But in the world of working from home these days, I have several of those clients that the folks aren't even present within a facility. They're working from home because that's how that goes. Now, I would say 80% of the calls that we, when price is asked for or it's a cremation call, our direct cremation they lead with the lowest price first every single time, even before any questions are asked. So even in this day and age where we've been told all of the statistics, consumer research has been done that's still happening. And I get a little frustrated, like, why are we still talking about price? Right. Why are we still talking about it? Instead of trying to combat it, what we can do to make our value worth it and do the right things on the phone. And you mentioned, I think, Ellery, here are the processes within the funeral home. We get in front of the family. Here's the steps that we take. The service occurs. We do great things afterwards to support the family. But I just had a revelation is that front end is missing. If you were to look at this as a circle, we've just pulled that whole part out. I know, Welton, from a website perspective, we get folks in that way, maybe through a Google, but then where is the phone part of that? We're trained very well to how to address families and to meet with them, but no one's necessarily trained on how to use the phone and how to connect with families. And I ask that in every training I do. I ask folks to raise their hand. Have you had a structured phone skills training as a part of your education? And maybe 5% of the time folks will raise their hands. And then I always delve into that. So where did you get the training? Well, I actually worked for an insurance agency before I became a funeral director. It's not even within the profession that they're getting that training. And it's not just necessarily the technical stuff, but it is the nuances of how to connect with families. So I'm hoping through what we're doing at Dead Ringers is that we can elevate the phone experience with anyone that calls into a firm. So
do you
addresses that question. Yeah.
That's a great question. And another correlation question is there a correlation between how long they keep that person on the phone and the success rate?
Yep. Everything that we do has a number to it, and even time is one of our measured factors. And the average call within our profession is about 3.5 minutes. But based on that, it's only about 2 minutes and 30 seconds because at average, we're on hold for 30 seconds.
Wow.
Now, that may not seem like a very big number. I have a whole presentation just on hold. Welcome me back maybe down the road, and I'll tell you about the whole hold transfer the phone process.
Yeah.
But we would say the best way to connect with the family, and the numbers that we focus on, are at least a 5-minute call, because you're spending at least 1 minute on getting to know them, 1 minute on asking, about where they are in the process, 1 minute explaining what's going to happen next, 1 minute on here's what we expect of you, and then closing the call. So that's kind of, a minute on each of those areas, getting them into the arrangement process. But let's get this set up first, and then someone will be and always setting expectations. Don't leave folks just, hanging out there. This is the next step. We'll be calling you within the next 12 hours to talk about this. So people know what's going to happen next. So, yeah.
Why are they putting people on hold? Are they transferring the call to someone else, or that's what it is?
Yeah. And it's usually the larger clients that we work with, because they're getting so many calls. So let me connect you to our funeral director, or, the counselor that can help you with this. And then they're on hold, and sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 5 seconds, but that process is and I've learned to have real empathy for the folks that are they're facilitators, the folks that are answering the phones, that aren't making the arrangements with folks. They're like, where's my funeral director? They're searching for someone, and so there's a lot of time doing that, and then their frustration starts to show. But it's folks being put on hold, finding who can take the call, and then probably most frustrating is that person then has to repeat everything that they told the person when they first made the call. So then they're reliving, all of that again. So we call that a soft transfer, where someone diligently provides, the basic information. You transfer that call to the person. They know your name once they pick up. They know the basics of why you're calling, and then that whole story doesn't have to happen again. So being put on hold, and I want to say probably 90% of the time calls are placed on hold for someone trying to find the right person to answer the call.
Right.
So,
and I think that handoff is so important, right? I mean, whether to say, first off, I think that I get lied to all the time when they say, can I put you on a brief hold? And then I'm halfway through my book, before they come back. But, to me as a consumer, I think I just want to know that somebody cares, right? I don't mean calling a funeral home. You had mentioned calling the cable company earlier. I literally have this demonic relationship with CenturyLink telephone company. Like, I divorced them about 5 years ago, and we literally went and celebrated at the best steakhouse. I mean, this company was the worst on the planet. Every month I'd have to call them up about my bill. I'd literally play Eye of the Tiger before I'd call them. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible experience. And I remember telling my wife, they just don't give a blank. Like, they just don't care. And they truly didn't care, right? This was a frontline person answering the phone. Their compensation was not in any way tied to my happiness. They were the huffing and puffing. So I think that if funeral homes, the first thing they do is, I think if they could just demonstrate that they care, like, I think that has to be it. I mean, I'm gonna automatically be attracted to people that care, So yeah. How do you teach somebody to care? Is that part of your training, or?
I think creating examples of putting folks in other people's shoes. I think that's really important. Listening to some of our calls have helped, I think. And I think owners should shop themselves, get a friend or something to call in. I mean, not that it would be taking business away from us. We definitely want, you to consider us, but you need to understand what's happening when you're not looking. And we think our folks do a really good job. And we've had folks tell us, oh, I'm not worried about this, but I really want, I just want to check in. And then they're flabbergasted at how the phone calls are handled. Yeah. So, I think compensation, I know that it's a tough world right now, but and how you compensate someone is really important too. That's something that we're studying at Dead Ringers is what is the best compensation for someone that's not a licensed funeral director or someone offering cemetery services if you want someone to manage that in a large organization. And I think that's so important to understand what that role really looks like, because there's no job description, I don't think, really for that kind of role. And I think sometimes too we overwhelm our hosts and hostesses and the folks that facilitate that. I know I've observed in some instances phone calls coming in, and then funeral directors are hovering around the desk while someone's trying to answer the phones, and it's like, get in your office and help her. So it's like having self-awareness of what's going on.
Yeah.
That we're there to help each other, and the distraction of her having folks huddled around her really showed. And I'm like, we stepped back, and I felt comfortable enough. I said, did you guys see what happened there? What? It's like, she's trying to do her job, and you're chatting, and you're distracting her from really helping one of your families. So it's having that self-awareness too in the work environment. So and it's the equipment, and there's so many different things that we need to, being trained to how to use to transfer a call.
Yeah.
That's something we run into too, is that you mentioned CenturyLink. They probably brought to you this great system, and then they just plopped it on your desk, and then how do you use it? So that's what we see too, is that these elaborate phone systems, but people don't know how to use them because there's so many options. So
let me ask you one other question then too, because I know in our company, if somebody calls and it's a potential funeral home customer of ours, right, or lead for us, we all in our own CRM, we always have this next step. So if I see a lead in our CRM without a next action step scheduled, to me, we've dropped the ball, right? Like there should always be a next step scheduled, always. Whether that's a week, 2 months out, whatever it is, there has to be a next step. So I think about, if I've got you on the phone, you've called me, you've asked me for a cremation price, you started with something super generic, and now I've got a relationship with you. What can I do to make sure that at the end of the day, after they've called 4 funeral homes, that I'm the one that stands out?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how I feel about this, but someone says, oh, go ahead and call the competitors and then call me. You've probably heard that one,
Yeah.
That, we offer the best services. But what I always suggest is having something tangible for them after the call. So we've talked about, several things today. I know that you probably have a lot of things whirling around in your mind, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to email you everything that we talked about today. I'll just do a brief recap of our discussion. I'm going to send you our price list and all of the services that we offer. So then you better have that stuff on hand, whether it's a nice PDF format or something where folks can work through that. I also direct folks back to the website. Now, once we're done, please take a look at our website, because there's some great resources there. Talking about what to think about in writing a eulogy, just all of the different kinds of things that will really help you through this process. And then we'll recap when we visit again. But having a tangible thing for them the tactile part of that, I think, is really important. People want to have something to do, even in loss, I think. So I think that email is really important, in that there is something they can look at after the call. So being kind of left just to hang, I think, is not a good thing. So having those types of materials in hand, and if someone does call in and they don't offer that, they have that.
Yeah.
So if they're calling a competitor, well, so-and-so said this, and so they have something to compare it to. And you're talking about your value offering, hopefully, in those documents.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think about, a distraught family after they call 4 or 5 funeral homes, have been on the phone all afternoon, they're exhausted. What did this one say? What did this one say? And if you're the only one in their inbox, or you're the only one that sent them a text message, automatically you're going to be different, because you're the only one that sent them something.
Just one thing, you get if there's anything I can do, please call me.
Yeah.
No, I'm gonna get this information to you, and tomorrow around 9:30 or 10, I'm just gonna call in to check on you. Is that okay? Because then you're, that's no, I just want to get this over. This is terrible. I feel terrible. But having the empathy to say, I'm going to check back in on you, whether you get the client or not, that shows human connection and empathy.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that folks will remember. So truly helping versus relying on them to call you back should they have any questions. So
That was one of the next questions I had was, do funeral homes ever call people back, later that day or, the next day or something? And I mean, I would expect that if they get that person on the phone and they've not made a decision yet, their closing rate has to be, pretty significant at that point, because you've got to be the only one reaching out there. Well, let me circle back with you about one thing. You asked, Nicole, if the direct cremation companies try harder on the phone. I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say yes. And here's the reason I say that. If you're a traditional funeral home, you're out on the boulevard, you've had this building for 80 years, people are going to know you, right? You're going to get calls just because of where you are, who you are, and how long you've been there. A lot of direct cremation companies don't have that luxury. And most of their calls, albeit probably 95% of them, are going to come through a platform like Google AdWords.
Yeah.
And they're paying a lot of money and they've got razor thin margins. And so I think they probably are at least a little more aware of how valuable that call is, which is probably going to make them try harder on that call. So I think that we've got complacency sometimes just because of the success we've had over the last 8 decades. And that's making us try a little bit harder or a little bit less hard than maybe somebody like that. I mean, well, you serve full service firms and you serve the direct cremation companies. I mean, which one, that may be a loaded question, but, do the direct cremation companies pay a little more attention to like the wording of the ads, how they're converting and all that stuff? Is that something that they pay a little more attention to?
They do.
I think, well, no, feel free to chime in here, but I think they care about processes because that's what drives everything that they do.
Yeah.
Here's the call, here's the next step, because a lot of them, there is a lot of calls they get actually, because when you throw those effective ads out there, people start to call in. However, they still slip up. There still needs to be empathy there, and that's what I've noticed that's not happening. One of the questions, and we may not find it cringeworthy at all, but it's like, well, how much does she weigh? When they talk about, come on.
Right.
That's not an effective question. But I do think when it comes to processes, they know here's my portal, that's my website. There's probably a phone number that they know from that particular ad or website that leads into a phone and from there. So when it comes to technology and data, they're really good at it, but I think they still need the polish, I guess you could say.
Sure.
So.
Yeah.
I don't know if that addresses that, but I think there's room for improvement in all facets. So,
Ellery, because when I do look at our client base, those that are successful, again, everybody's successful definition is different. Those that are still growing, volume-wise, they're always much better in phone conversions. Like if you look at John T. McQueen, right, his average time on the phone is like 15 or 18 minutes. It's long. It's like a needs analysis call.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know it's more than 15 minutes. The brothers and cousins, they actually compete on how long those calls are. They track the conversion ratio, right? The family members, they actually turn that into a contest. Who has the highest conversion
rate? Yeah.
Right. So just they don't let any calls go uncared for.
Yeah. So, Nicole, what does training look like? I mean, if I hired a company, yours or another company, I mean, like, what does phone training look like for a funeral home? I mean, what kind of points are you guys going over? Obviously, the empathy is one, and it's interesting to see, and I've seen it firsthand, the lack of empathy in a business that probably should be more empathetic than any other one out there. But they have that. But what does training look like? Is it role playing? Is it kind of building, like, do you build different conversational scripts, if you will? And I'm saying that with air quotes, but for different personas, right? For like a pre-need customer versus a cremation versus a full service for traditional family.
Yeah, we start kind of high level, and then we really dig down into the nuts and bolts of things. We want to make people feel uncomfortable right off the bat, because that's how serious I think this is. So we'll play some calls, and we dissect those calls. All right, so what did he do here? What can we do to improve this call? And everyone has the right answers, but they're not even exhibiting that behavior on their own, because we've recorded their calls too. Right. And we try to protect the innocent. We're not being malicious in any of this. We're trying to be objective. And so it's kind of giving a state of the union as far as phone skills are concerned. And then we have several acronyms that we use to help delve into key areas. So my favorite is probably dial. So you deliver on your pronunciation.
Mhm.
Okay. Or deliver just the message. I is you inflect. A lot of times we get the, inflect.
Right.
A is have, avoiding all of the things that we've just talked about. So I've had folks that I managed a team of 8 folks that did outbound calls, and my best caller always had gum in her mouth. I'm like, come on,
Yeah.
get the gum out of your mouth. And then L, listen. I know we get sick of hearing that word, but it's so important to listen. So that's our dial method. So that's kind of, Broadway. And then we dig down, and we give tips on, asking for names. What are good ways to ask for names? How to transfer someone. So I'm really kind of broad brushing this.
Yeah.
At the end is folks creating their own scenario. So when someone calls in, here are 5 things that you need to think about. I don't like to give scripts out anymore. There is no silver bullet, but there are at least, certain things that you need to cover in each call. And so we have a script skeleton, and, it's really 5 things, how you answer the phone, your greeting, and how you close the call. Names. That's another part of our script skeleton. Asking open-ended questions. That's another key part of that. If you have any actionable items, like I mentioned, sending the email, I'm going to follow up with this call. And then just the empathy part of that. So it's, we've become, we all are human, and I think sometimes we're afraid of making a mistake. And, then that shows in how we answer the phone. I'm going to do everything I can not to get an FTC violation.
Right.
Come on. When you should be adept at, how to answer those price calls. That's something that's very important. Also understanding your offering. I don't know how many times we've listened to calls where people fumble over what it is that they offer. Every day you should say, here's who we are, here are our products, here's what it is that we provide our families. And we hear paper fumbling. I should be able, I'm sure both of you, Welton and Ellery, you can say, here's what we offer.
Right.
As a part of your offering, and people stumble over that. So I think we're much more comfortable once we're in the arrangement room or we're sitting down with the family, but we need to be adept at that as we're talking with folks over the phone. So.
That makes me think of something. So I study conversions on websites a lot, and, you've always seen these 3 pricing tables, right? The good, the better, and the best. I mean, it's sort of a common thing now. And one of the things that I saw that affected the conversion rate on it was when the price was at the bottom. And the reason they did that was because the price was at the top. People made a judgment about the price without looking at what they got with it. So they weren't looking at a true comparison. So I think about if somebody called up and said, well, how much is your cremation? If you really wanted to just get into the details, you could say, well, look, we've got 3 different, packages, if you will. And the first comes with this, and this, and then there's the price. Instead of saying the price first and then trying to get into what it involves. Because I think if somebody hears a price, they're not an experienced funeral shopper, if you will, they're going to tune it out, and so I think, again, this goes back to what you talked about learning how to demonstrate your value and talking about what you're offering, before that, because otherwise you're just competing on price.
Yeah. And I think that we may not want to ask it, but that question, have you ever made cremation arrangements before?
That's genius.
Because that will give me an idea of how I can help you with this. Price is just one factor, and we offer a value here, but I really want to understand what it is that you're looking for, and we can go from there. We always want to go large. You're probably just looking for price. Sometimes people don't even get the P word out of their mouth, and we go straight. You're calling, because this is cremation, you're calling for price. No, I'm calling because my dad is interested in cremation. That's what he mentioned that he wanted.
Right.
And so we lead the conversation, and that's how we lose clients, I think, sometimes too, is that we're not, the L and dial, we're not listening to what people have to say.
Right. Yeah. We're shooting ourselves in the foot with our own assumptions.
Yeah.
Well, what we're going to do, for everybody listening, Nicole is graciously agreed to give us some of these cringeworthy call recordings. And just to make the audio better, we're going to just cue these up at the very end when we're done. She's going to give us a couple of them. She's already teased me on some of them, and they're going to be very funny to you. Some are going to be a little bit unbelievable, but I think it's noteworthy because this stuff really does happen. This wasn't an act. I mean, this was an actual call that was recorded. So as we wrap up, Nicole, thank you so much for your insights.
I could talk about this all night. So
well, we want to.
We turn into a movie, not a podcast.
We want to do a Dead Ringers Part 2.
That would be
because I think
great. I
there's so
appreciate
much
that.
to get into
Yeah.
this thing. I mean, I think that the key thing that I'm taking away from this is just have empathy, and it's something I think a lot of people think they have, but they don't demonstrate very well. And I think we talk a lot, Welton and I do, about marketing, and I think empathy is displayed in the words you use on your website, right? And how,
Mm-hmm.
and copy and design, and there's so many different places where you can drop the ball by not displaying empathy. And so I think the phone is probably the most obvious place that you can either connect or disconnect just by the way you're thinking about what they're going through, right? Are you
Yes.
thinking like a funeral director just spewing out information, or are you trying to think like Nicole, whose father really is in hospice and she's on the worst day of her life? So that's a really good point. So at the end of this, we're going to bring this up here. If anybody's interested in learning more about Dead Ringers, I asked them, is it deadringers.co?
Yes.
Okay.
.co. Yes.
.co,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, cool. So they can reach out to you there, and I'm sure you're on
Absolutely.
LinkedIn and all the other obvious places.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. So we encourage all the audience to use Nicole's service, or at least listen to what she's got and how she can help your funeral home. If you've got value out of this episode, we ask that you leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. That helps others find out about us. And also, we'd love to have any feedback. So if you enjoyed the episode, if you have any topics you want us to talk about, is there anything that we can help your funeral home or cemetery with? We would certainly love to have that. So again, on behalf of the audience and Welton and myself, we thank you so much, Nicole, for what you brought to this, and we'll
You're
look forward to
welcome.
talking
This
with
has
you
been
again.
fun.
Okay,
Yeah,
sounds
thank
good.
you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
I was wondering if you could explain cremation to me.
No, dear. It's when the body is just burned.
Oh, okay. So what all's involved in that?
Dear, I don't have the time for this now.
Okay.
Good morning, Al speaking.
Hi, my uncle's not doing the greatest, and I was just calling to get information on what kind of services that you offer.
We have a funeral home right on site, a crematorium, a cemetery.
Okay, and so for like cremation, what would like it be? I don't know. I'm a little lost in the pricing.
A lot depends on what you're going to do with the cremated remains. Where you're going to have a service or not, or
Yeah, with the service.
okay, would the service be in the chapel?
Yeah.
Depending on what type of casket or container you chose, that can vary. Do you have some time? Maybe we can get together. Might be a little more beneficial for you.
Well, I'm just trying to get some information for now, so I'm not like I'm a little lost right now, but so I would at least know a little bit before I come in.
Right. Prices can vary depending, like I said, what casket you choose. If you want reception and food and all that,
No,
I can
just
give
the
you.
service. Okay, it would.
Hello.
Yeah, sorry.
Ballpark, and I can't put a number on it. You're probably looking at around 7 to 10,000, depending on what you want.
7 to 10,000. Okay. And roughly, what would that be coming with?
That would include like a full chapel service.
Hi there, thank you for choosing NW. My name is Vivian and I'll get your
Okay.
order.
Excuse me a second. Could I get a mama burger platter with small gravy?
Would you like mama burger with cheese or without?
With cheese.
And fries, small gravy, and let's put the drink.
Small orange pop or something.
Sorry?
A small root beer.
Small like this?
Yeah.
Sure. Would you like any apple or blueberry pie for your dessert?
No, just that, thanks.
Alright, does the order look at for me here?
Sorry about that, sir.
It's okay.
So, yeah, I mean, like I said, a lot depends on the casket or the container you choose.